So after some years of getting really clobbered by my trauma through my awakening process, and after having had that trauma structure fall away, sort of a map showed up. And I thought I would share it, just not as a guaranteed way to navigate this, but as a place to orient. Because trauma, when it affects the body and can potentially get in the way of our awakening, seems to manifest in certain areas in the body. Before I really start this, I have to throw out the massive disclaimer qualifier. This is how it happened here. I would not recommend really holding on to any of this really, really tightly. Please absorb all of it in sort of a loose fashion. And if it doesn't apply, that's great. This is just the report from this particular experience. So in order to lay out the map, I think I want to share an earlier map, the one that I first heard of from Adyashanti. And it was the map of the different awakenings in the body. It was almost like stages. And he divided those into 3 stages. There was awakening of the mind, there was awakening of the heart, and there was an awakening in the gut. And that seemed very profound to me. So I'll just go through those very quickly. And they do, it was really funny that I happened to see a really direct connection. Not until much later, but I was like, wow, okay. They're intrinsically connected. So awakening of the mind is awakening to the sense of awareness or presence or consciousness. It's moving out of mind identification and into what you truly are. Basically, I'm just skimming over these. Awakening of the heart, which seems to occur more down in this area here, is awakening to aspects of existence like love, unity, oneness, non-duality. That's where that occurs. And then awakening of the gut, which becomes a little challenging to describe. We will just say for this topic is existential in nature, no self, at the very deepest level. So how does that pertain to trauma? Trauma seems to manifest in these 3 different categories in very unique ways. So we'll cover them. First of all, we'll talk about up here. We'll talk about in the mind. The mind, or what we'll say is the thoughts, is where the reactions to trauma come from and where our interpretations are stored. This is where our pieces of information are stored. This is where messages will occur. Things like, this isn't safe, or don't be around this person, or remove myself from this environment. Those are the immediate ones. And then the secondary ones start to become a little bit more cemented into our psyche and really dictate how it is that we move through the world. And these can be really, really, really varied. They also contain our coping mechanisms. What do we do when the trauma is activated? What do we do when it's triggered? How do we respond? Is it the fight, the flight, or the freeze, or the fawn? I think there's a 4th one. I don't really remember. Anyway. So those are the cumulative interpretation of the mind as it has experienced some of these extreme events. And this is also relevant for regular identity as well, too. They just seem to be a little bit more extreme and really sort of locked in, kind of like welded into the mind. So what do we do about that? The applications seem to coincide with where the location is. Meditation, if it's something that you feel like you are inclined to do, is a good place to start on this one. And what medication, not medication, or medication. I'm not even going to edit that out. meditation um, can be an area where we start to look at the stuff that's happening in the mind. And we've experienced some trauma. Initially, meditation can be very frustrating because these methods can temporarily shut down what's actually happening um, in terms of our defense mechanisms in the body. More simply put, if you are trying to focus on something singularly or focus on a still point or whatever, it briefly just drops the um, all the defense mechanisms. And whilst one person might really get a whole sense of peace or a sense of quiet or a sense of stillness from that, if we've been activated by trauma, what that's doing is it's like lowering the drawbridge. It's like putting the guard down, and you see this, this whole thing just come down, and then everything is right out there. So if you're inclined to meditation, I will say that it's beneficial. Not going to say it necessarily works all the time or is there for other people. So there can be alternative methods or softer, gentler things that you can do, up to and including things like walks in nature, just finding yourself away from, if you can, finding yourself in environments where you're away from triggers. That could be just going off to a quiet, still place, spending just a few minutes just breathing, any and all of that. So the second one, and this is the one that really gave me the worst time. We're going to move from here and then move into the chest. And this is when I uncovered it, I called it the trauma ball. And this is where energetically, where the responses are stored in the body, where, and without us being able to feel through what is happening when we're experiencing trauma, obviously this stuff has nowhere to go. How does that affect us energetically? This is what happens when the thought is triggered and it moves right down here. And that is what causes body sensations. That's also what causes action and movement. That's why your palms can get sweaty. That's why you feel like you're pumped full of cortisol. That's why um, your body moves into that, all your muscles get really, really tight, or you get into a clench, or you get angry, or you have a defense mechanism, or you cry. The reactions can be all over the place. So this is where the responses are stored. This one is, I think, the area where people will tend to turn away. I think that we can, to a degree anyway, or once we get here, seems to be the one initially that's the daunting area, because this is sort of cerebral up here. We can sort of look at patterns, we can examine them, and in and apply some type of remedies. This area is where things like journaling is really good, where if you want to talk about it, where if you're doing some therapy, some type of trauma therapy, or you're really analyzing something, this area is really, really good. And I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth here. I'm just sort of winging this one. And this up here initially is very necessary. If we're trying to track down this mystery of how the trauma unfolded. I did that for a while, and it was very much like, okay, and I was connecting the dots. I respond this way because this happened. Oh, but that was something that was earlier. Okay, so then it would finally maybe make its way back to like the prime event of something about my childhood, or something about my parents, or something about an event when I was very, very young. So that's where this um, can really be beneficial. And at that point, write stuff down, track it. There's nothing wrong with that. Please, I would not ignore that, or listen to a suggestion when you're in that phase that that it's just all thought, that it's all conceptual. For trauma people, it's okay at certain points in times to do this, because at least there's a sense of we're looking at it. We're seeing it, we're able to track it, and that can reduce this grand, great big, scary mystery into pages on a journal or into something that I go, okay, I've now compressed it into something, even though it's still an intellectual in nature, right? Or in words written down. I can work with this. This is, okay, this is a good starting point. So anyway, a little bit of a tangent there. So now we get into this one, and it's from here to here that I find was very, very challenging for me. And I've seen it in other people as well, too, where they will go and be identified and say, okay, I've understood this trauma, I have this trauma, or I've experienced it. But right at that point, in between here and here, there's a re-identification, right? I am a trauma person. This is just my lot in life. This is just how things are. I will always be a trauma person. We'll get into why that's not necessarily beneficial all the way through. Okay. But this is where it can happen. And I think that's a normal, natural response, because as soon as we get into here, these sensations, this area where the experiences are stored, don't respond to thought. They don't respond to intellectual analysis. They don't respond to mental antidotes, pushing back on it. I'm just going to say that I'm not traumatized anymore, or any type of message where you're pushing back against something. This is the area where things need to be felt through. In my particular case, it was bonkers because there was so much stored trauma, and I did not know where to start or how to even begin to deal with that. And there is a video in my playlist that sort of describes that. If you want to watch that, it's the second video uh, in my interview section. It's called Frank Enlightenment. And word of caution on that: it's horrifying and is absolutely not indicative of how everyone's experience will go. That is just how it happened here. I mention it because whilst I don't want folks to think, oh my God, that could happen to me, right? Which is going to be inevitable. I'm sure somebody will think that. More along the lines of, wow, look how extreme that is. It's survivable. And also it's not, it's way out here. It's not in the middle of the spectrum. But when we start to move into this area, there's going to be discomfort. So what does that really look like? Well, what it looked like for me here is I learned this from other people, and so many teachers talk about this. It's moving the attention right into the area that gets lit up, where we're experiencing the sensations. And that's different for many people. It can start as maybe a tightness in the throat. It can be something in the chest. It can be something in the gut. It can be sweaty palms. It can be tension all over. It can really show up in a bunch of different ways. I'm just referring to it here because it's more of a feeling, like a heart-based thing. And this will ask to be felt through. The good part about it is that we can, to varying degrees, we can take this in chunks or tidbits or um, little pieces of it, and then rest for a while. We can do some exploration. And what I mean by exploration is not necessarily sitting down and saying, okay, I'm going to feel through this stuff. It's being very present when these triggers come up, when the chest area lights up or there's a huge feeling sensation, and we go, okay, and you just sit there and you move all your attention there and you hold it. You stay with it as long as you can. There's no set amount of time. There's no specific duration. And I assure you that anytime that we feel into that, it does have a cumulative effect. There's a finite amount of what is needing to be felt through that is stored up in the body. So moving into the third one, this is when we've taken our specific experiences, right? So there's been a bunch of stuff that's been analyzed up here, and maybe possibly some kind of a shift where we're like, oh, I'm not this, I'm not my thoughts. Then we're moving into this here. And there can be deeper shifts and deeper senses of clarity in here as we feel through this stuff. And then it moves down into the gut. The gut is the weirdest one. The gut is existential in nature in terms of this trauma. And these have messages, but they won't necessarily show up in thought. These have messages that are, I am a person, I'm in a body, and that body is never safe. I am afraid. The of what is fill in the blank. There is just a deep rooted sense of fear here that, because we've experienced a bunch of trauma, has really, really, really been rooted down in there. And I don't want to mention too many specifics about it, just because everyone's responses and what happens when they get to that spot is going to be very, very different. So we'll just say this is interpretations, the stored energy here, and the gut. So I didn't mention working with the gut. And what I discovered for the most part is actually almost completely is the benefit to what happens with the gut there. Not necessarily a benefit, but this is where grace comes in. This work isn't done by us. The work is done for us. Now, initially, when I heard that, I was more up in the head and in the heart, sort of bouncing back and forth. And I can remember begging and pleading for grace. And grace does come in many forms. That's a whole other video of how grace manifests. But grace is what's doing that work for us. It's not something we have to try to do. And as a matter of fact, if it seems to me that if we're trying to do it, that is moving us back into a sense of separate self and into a sense of effort and into a sense of I have to do this. And if we've experienced any type of trauma at all, we understand that if there is effort there, there's the distinct, almost guaranteed possibility that we're going to fail at some point, and then boom, shame, instant shame, right? So this area, whilst it can produce some of the deepest emotions, if we're already through the majority of this and have felt through a lot of this, moving down into this, we're used to it by then, possibly, potentially so. And I experienced that recently after feeling through what I thought was almost everything, feeling through this trauma structure, trying what seemed to be this endless amount of, for lack of a better term, processing, moving through the body. And I had this huge trauma ball kind of collapse a few years ago. And then for the next couple, 2-3 years, I was on cleanup. But at the time, it didn't necessarily feel like cleanup. It felt more like, fuck, how much more do I have to go? You know? And to make matters worse, by that stage in the game, I was out of the ability to engage any type of defense mechanism, any type of coping mechanism, any type of pushback on it. So that made all the feelings more intense. Now, on the other side, just not to make it sound super terrifying, by that point, there was also a deep sense of, okay, well, what's next? There's a sense of acceptance, and there's a lack of resistance to sensations. I certainly was not excited about having them happen, and I had moments or periods where I was really fatigued, where I was just, God, make it stop. Okay, I think I've done enough. Have I not done enough? You know? So We're wrapping up that tail end of it. We're down here and we felt through a bunch of this stuff. That's scraping at the bottom of the barrel. At some point, once that barrel has been scraped, then all the content, or the vast majority of the content, has been felt through, has come up and out. The barrel will collapse. And that collapse was what I described as the collapsing of the trauma structure, of the identity structure, of feeling like trauma was in here, feeling like I'm a trauma person, or I am my trauma, or any type of identity with that collapsed. Um, it seemed both simultaneous and to kind of happen over a number of weeks. And there were chunks of it, really big chunks of it, that I had no sense of personal, I didn't have anything to do with it, whether I was dreaming, um, and I would be processing these really, really crazy dreams with very specific emotional themes around things like fear or anger or desire or resistance or whatever. And they were never really abstract. It was very, very clear. And then I'd wake up in the middle, the night or in that morning and just be like, and then have to sit and feel through that for a while. So that was being done for me because I certainly was not trying to process while I'm sleeping. And then the last few bits of it, where I felt like they were literally being burned out of me. So, and that was 100% grace. I had nothing to do with that. In reality, I had nothing to do with any of it. But when we're up here, or even engaging the willingness to move here, it can feel like a sense of personal volition. It can feel like, okay, I'm doing this, and that's fine. That's totally fine. There's one crucial step that I saved for last. And it seems like this is the one. This is the thing that's going to unlock all of these. All right. This is not an absolute statement. It's just how it happened here, nor is it fixed and does it have to be absolutely maintained at all times. It's not what I'm saying. So there's my qualifier. The key is, can we say to ourselves, I'm willing to be uncomfortable. I'm willing to feel what needs to be felt. I'm willing to look into these areas to shine a light on some of the stuff that's been sitting in darkness. And it's this opening. That's going to come in varying degrees. And that's going to come in times where we're feeling great and we're like, yeah, I'm ready. Let's fucking do this. And other times, no, absolutely not. Or there might be some sort of energetic sense of willingness, but this trained mind will engage those coping mechanisms and all those structures that are created and say, no, you're not. Not on my watch. Oh, hell no. So the reason I mentioned that it may ebb or flow like that is it only just needs it just needs a little tiny yes. It doesn't have to be a grand thing. It doesn't have to be, um, you know, just, yes, bring it all here. But it does have to happen to some degree or another. And then when it stops or you pull back from it and there's a no, then we can arrest that resistance at any point in time. Can you be with this? No. Okay, fine. Can you be with the no and feel into that? Not even, just, okay, it's just going to be a no, and sit with it without further reactivity. You stop it right there, you're actually up here. But I don't want to give away the secret there, but it's just a staying with it. What it's doing is it's shutting off the resistance mechanism. And what if get to this one here? Can I be with the no? No, fuck that. Nope. There's the next one. It doesn't matter how far down it goes. It doesn't matter if you've layered up 15 hell knows, fuck yous, and never. But if you can get to the final one where you're like, this is where I can sit. I can deal with this. I can be here with this. Then that's the point where it can be arrested. And you sort of, in a way, you sort of find yourself all the way back up here. And, okay, what do you got? Strange to look at this in these terms if we're traumatized and we look at these things in terms of paradox. One part of us says, absolutely not. I've felt enough. I've earned my fucking stripes. I don't need to feel through anymore. Why are you asking me to do this? You've lost your mind. I don't want to talk to anybody about it. I don't want to sit with it. I just want relief. Understandable. The other part of us, though, is it's almost its counterpart that has felt through all that stuff, that knows what it's like to experience those sensations in the body. And then there might be a third part where there's a sensing. I can handle this. This is the way through. Now, my giant qualifier there is everybody is different. This does not need to be taken on all at once. Any and all methods that are healthy are important. Taking care of the body, resting, not trying to poke the bear on this one. This doesn't have to be a push and force situation. Not at all. Because people's personalities are configured very, very, very differently. You may need to take little teeny tiny bites of this. That's great. You'll know your inherent configuration. And if you feel like you have to push a little too hard, or you're pushing, or, ooh, I don't know if I'm ready to dive into that, don't. Don't. I feel very strongly about sharing that this is a very open way of feeling into things, because we are all configured to respond to not only the external world in trauma, but our own internal emotions in very, very, very different ways. So we take a minute to sense into it, though I think we'll know our general basic configuration. So again, it's just this willingness. Can I be with what's here? Can I be with whatever emotions come up? And then if you find yourself up in the head, you may notice, okay, it's time to get into some, not necessarily solutions, but some sort of categorization. You'll know when it's time. It's weird. At least I knew when it was time to a degree. I mean, I had to be pushed a little bit from behind. I had some friends do that, and life itself pushed me a little bit from behind. But what happened here was this. I went, okay, I've analyzed everything. I know pretty much where it came from and can, get down into dates and times and places and people. And I'm still reactive. Like really, really reactive, not just your normal amount of reactivity. This isn't getting any better. And then, so I had all the stuff up here, and then it just like, oh God, I got to move down into the chest a little bit. I got to move down into, okay, fine. And then I would pop back up and then down and then pop back up, and it cycled. But this will start to get stale after a while. The same thing here. There's a finite amount of stuff that needs to be felt through. It may seem like forever, but it's not. That's just not how things work. Not when it's stored energy in the body. And then finally, the existential stuff, which is where grace kicks in. And to be fair, grace kicks in all three locations, at all three stages. Really, the whole thing is grace. But it becomes more apparent when it's all the way down here, where we don't have to get into, oh, I failed. Oh, I tried. He said to feel into it, and I couldn't even do it at all. I just curled up into a ball or whatever. I just got into massive reactivity. That is assuming that we need to orchestrate how this goes. I had no idea. First of all, I didn't know that there was that much trauma in there. I had no idea how to navigate it. And even if you had told me, okay, you've got a lot of trauma in there, you got to work through it, I'd be like, what the fuck does that even look like? Right? How am I supposed to write out an itinerary for an awakening? How am I supposed to write out my lesson plan for how I do this? So in me bringing up these maps, these are just generalizations to understand what's happening and when, or a place to orient to. Oh, it feels like up here. Okay, fine. It feels like in here. Can I feel through this? It feels like in the gut. And they do switch around. I had times where I bounced down into one and then back up and then in here and then back up in here. So it's not a very specific model. So hold it really, really loosely. Remember, the key is just that willingness, that tiny, tiny little bit of willingness to go, I'm willing to feel what's here. This process does want to heal this. We do have to meet it at some point. I was surprised, though, how many times I found grace along the way. And that grace sometimes looked like rest or a big shift or an opening for a minute or a sense of peace or a seeing through um, an illusion and identity. And other times it felt like, oh, I'm getting clobbered. I have a whole video about that. Um, so we don't necessarily know what the form that grace is coming in. So there's the map, the loose map. If there are questions, you're welcome to put them in the comments or whatever. I'll respond to them. Again, it's just a loose how it happened here. If it's beneficial there, it's great. It's not gospel written in stone. I didn't come down off the mountain with 10 of these things on stone tablets. It's just the experience here. So, thank you for listening. Be blessed.